Take a deep breath and feel the gentle rhythm of the sea. Imagine the sound of waves touching the wooden hull beneath your feet. The cold northern wind brushes your face as you stand on a Viking ship around you. Brave sailors adjust the sails and gaze at the endless horizon. Tonight, we sail together to discover how the Vikings mastered the seas. Long before the first dragon ships sliced through the icy waters of the North Atlantic, the sea had already claimed the hearts of the people who would come to be known as Vikings. In the fjords of Scandinavia, where steep cliffs rose from dark, cold waters, and forests stretched endlessly behind small villages, the ocean was more than a barrier, it was a lifeline, a path to opportunity, and a constant companion. From a young age, boys and girls listened to the tales of distant lands, of merchants and raiders, of islands beyond the horizon where fortunes and adventure waited. The rhythm of the waves, the cry of seagulls, and the scent of salt in the air were not merely part of the landscape, they were an integral element of the Viking soul. Viking society, although often remembered for its raiders and warriors, was deeply entwined with maritime knowledge. Fishermen and traders navigated rivers and coasts, learning the subtle signs of tides and currents, the appearance of clouds that foretold storms, and the changing behavior of birds as indicators of nearby land. The skills learned on small boats would later become the foundation for far more ambitious seafaring ventures. Even in the harshest winters, when snow blanketed the villages and fjords froze over, the sea never lost its allure. Parents told stories to keep the young awake during long nights. Stories of ancestors who had crossed treacherous waters, encountering foreign peoples, and returning with tales of adventure and treasures. The earliest Viking vessels were simple yet ingeniously crafted. Small dugouts and rowing boats allowed fishermen to explore coastal waters, transport goods, and engage in local trade. These modest beginnings fostered a familiarity with the sea, a respect for its power, and an understanding of its unpredictable nature. Children learned to handle small oars and to read the wind, and soon a cultural pattern emerged. Mastery of the sea was not optional, it was essential. Families passed down their knowledge through hands-on instruction, and stories of past voyages carried practical lessons as well as inspiration for every boy who dreamed of the horizon. There were mentors to guide him. Older sailors demonstrated how to balance on slippery decks, how to keep the vessel steady in sudden squalls, and how to observe the stars to determine direction at night. They taught that courage was necessary, but so was patience, observation, and humility before the elements. The sea demanded respect, and those who disregarded its lessons often paid a heavy price. Yet, the rewards for those who could understand and navigate the waves were immense: wealth, renown, and the opportunity to shape history through exploration and conquest. The fjords themselves acted as classrooms for future sailors. Narrow inlets, hidden coves, and sheltered bays provided safe havens to practice rowing, sailing, and maintaining vessels. Seasonal variations of wind and tide created conditions that tested skill and endurance, ensuring that young navigators were prepared for the challenges of the open ocean. By observing the behavior of seaweed, the currents, and the migration of fish, apprentices began to internalize patterns that would later guide them across hundreds of miles of unfamiliar waters. It was not only necessity that drew Vikings to the sea, but also a profound sense of curiosity and ambition. Oral traditions spoke of islands where the sun barely dipped below the horizon, forests thick with game, and lands rich in timber and fertile soil. Merchants whispered of distant markets, and raiders imagined and guarded villages whose wealth could be claimed. The sea became a canvas upon which dreams were painted, and for each young sailor, the horizon represented a challenge to be met and a story waiting to be written. The seasonal rhythm of the North inspired preparation and planning. Winters were harsh, and the rivers often froze, but spring brought thawing waters and opportunities. Communities gathered resources, repaired boats, and discussed potential destinations. The elders emphasized prudence and foresight, reminding the youth that ambition without preparation led to disaster. By late spring, when the ice had receded and the winds favored departure, the first voyages of the season began. The air was crisp, the scent of salt strong, and the water reflected the pale northern sun. For the Vikings, setting sail was both a necessity and a rite of passage, a moment when the familiar world of fjords and forests gave way to the vast and predictable ocean. Every journey began with rituals, both practical and symbolic. Boats were blessed with oil and paint to protect against water damage. Offerings were made to the spirits of the sea, not as gods but as reminders of the forces that could not be controlled. These ceremonies reinforced the community's shared respect for the ocean and underscored the seriousness of the undertaking. The young sailors, dressed in simple garments suitable for rowing and exposure to the elements, felt the weight of responsibility alongside the thrill of adventure. By the time the dragon ships emerged sleek, long vessels designed for speed and agility, the Vikings had already mastered the essential principles of seamanship. They understood how to harness the wind in square sails, how to balance oars in synchrony across dozens of rowers, and how to navigate using landmarks, currents, and the stars. Each voyage built on previous knowledge, blending tradition with innovation. The ocean was no longer merely a space to traverse, it was a domain to be studied, respected, and ultimately conquered through skill and ingenuity. This early relationship with the sea instilled values that would define Viking society: courage tempered by prudence, ambition guided by preparation, and the pursuit of wealth and adventure balanced by communal responsibility. Every child who grew up listening to tales of ancestors and practicing on small boats absorbed these lessons. The call of the sea was not merely a call to travel or plunder, it was a call to master the environment, to understand the rhythm of the world, and to participate in a legacy that would stretch across centuries. And so, as the sun dipped low behind the cliffs and the fjords echoed with the cries of gulls, the young Vikings gazed toward the horizon with eyes wide and hearts open. They did not yet know the lands they would discover, the battles they would face, or the stories they would tell. Yet the call of the sea was undeniable, whispering of freedom, challenge, and the promise of history waiting to be made. The rhythm of the waves, the scent of salt, and the lessons passed down from elders created a symphony of preparation, shaping the minds and hearts of those destined to become masters of the ocean. The creation of a dragon ship, or dragger, was a process that combined ingenuity, patience, and intimate knowledge of the sea. In Viking villages along fjords and river mouths, master shipwrights worked in long sheds, their hands worn by decades of carving and bending timber, their eyes sharp for the slightest imperfection. These craftsmen were revered members of the community, for the ships they built would carry the lives, ambitions, and fortunes of their people across dangerous waters. A poorly constructed vessel could spell disaster. A well-crafted one could carry a crew to distant lands and back safely. The foundation of any dragon ship was the keel, a strong backbone of oak that would define the shape and strength of the vessel. Oak was prized not only for its durability but also for its resistance to rot, a vital characteristic for journeys through icy northern waters. The keel was carefully shaped and placed, with attention to the grain of the wood and the distribution of weight. From the spine, the ribs of the ship were attached, curved planks that formed the hull, each fastened with iron rivets or trenails, wooden pegs driven tight to hold the planks together. Planks were not just functional, they were carefully selected and treated. Pine and spruce were often used for the sides and deck, their straight grain and light weight making them ideal for speed and maneuverability. Wood was seasoned for months, sometimes years, to reduce moisture content and prevent warping at sea. The shaping of each plank required skill. The edges had to fit perfectly with the necks, leaving no gaps for water to seep in. Master shipwrights often used steam and heat to bend planks into the precise curves required, a process demanding patience and expert timing. Beyond wood, other materials played a crucial role. Tar and pitch were applied to seams to make them watertight, protecting the ship from leaks. Iron nails and fittings reinforced structural points, while ropes made from hemp-bound masts, sails, and oars in a network of tension and support. The sail itself was often woven from wool or flax, dyed with natural pigments, and reinforced at the corners to withstand wind forces. Every detail, from the placement of the rowlocks to the alignment of the oar holes, affected the ship's performance in battle, exploration, and open ocean travel. Crafting a dragon ship was also a social event, a convergence of knowledge and community effort. Young apprentices observed and assisted, learning not only the techniques but also the values of precision, patience, and respect for materials. Villagers sometimes brought food and drink to support the shipwrights during long construction seasons. Songs were sung and tales told, recounting famous voyages, battles, and discoveries, reminding everyone that this work was not merely carpentry but a contribution to the survival and glory of the people. The iconic dragon figurehead, carved at the prow, was both symbolic and psychological. The fearsome visage of a dragon or serpent was meant to intimidate enemies and invoke awe. Carving these figureheads required not only artistry but also an understanding of balance. Too heavy a prow could destabilize the ship, while too light would reduce its momentum. Often, elders would bless the figurehead with rituals or offerings, not as a worship of a god, but as a symbolic acknowledgement of the power of the sea and the challenges ahead. Once construction was complete, the ship underwent trials in the water. It was launched carefully, sometimes in teams, to test buoyancy, balance, and the integrity of seams. Experienced sailors rowed and sailed, checking for handling in different wind and tide conditions. Adjustments were made, and minor flaws corrected, ensuring that when the ship finally departed for distant lands, it could withstand storms, carry supplies, and support dozens of rowers and warriors. The construction of each dragon ship was therefore more than the assembly of wood and metal. It was the embodiment of knowledge accumulated over generations. It represented the Vikings' understanding of physics, materials, and environmental forces, as well as their social organization and ability to transmit expertise. These ships were not mere tools, they were living instruments of exploration, trade, warfare, and connection, shaping the destiny of Viking communities. Young Vikings, having watched the process from start to finish, internalized lessons far beyond carpentry. They learned the importance of preparation, teamwork, and meticulous attention to detail. They understood that success on the sea was not determined by strength alone but by strategy, timing, and respect for natural forces. The dragon ship became a teacher, a symbol, and a vessel of possibility, carrying both people and cultural memory across the waves. Every dragon ship built in these fjord-side workshops would eventually embark on journeys that spanned hundreds, even thousands of miles. They would navigate treacherous waters, face storms, and approach foreign lands with both caution and ambition. The mastery of building such ships allowed Viking society to expand its horizons, integrate distant communities, and project influence across the North Atlantic. Each vessel was a testament to human skill, resilience, and vision, a combination of technical mastery and cultural identity that would define a civilization. Before the dragon ships could cut through the icy waves of the North Atlantic, extensive preparation was required. The journey was not merely a departure from familiar fjords and rivers, it was a complex orchestration of materials, manpower, timing, and knowledge, each element as crucial as the next. For Viking communities, preparation for a sea voyage was a ritual, practical necessity, and a social event all at once. In the early weeks of spring, when the thaw began to loosen the ice along rivers and fjords, communities gathered in shipyards and longhouses. Families brought provisions, tools, and materials while master shipwrights finalized the last touches on the dragon ships. Every detail mattered. A loose rivet, a damaged plank, or an improperly tied rope could mean disaster once the vessel was at sea. Observers, apprentices, and even children watched closely, learning the rhythms of preparation that would one day guide their own journeys. Food was among the most critical concerns. Voyages often lasted weeks, sometimes months, and required sustenance that would not spoil quickly. Dried fish, salted meat, grains, and hardtack bread were staples, carefully packed into barrels and crates. Herbs and smoked provisions were added both for taste and preservation. Water casks were filled, carefully sealed, and placed near the center of the ship to maintain balance. Preparation of provisions was a meticulous task. Spoilage could lead to illness, weakened crew, and failed missions. Weapons and armor also required careful attention. Shields were checked for cracks, iron helmets polished, and axes and spears sharpened. Each warrior ensured that their equipment was not only functional but also properly maintained for quick deployment. Even the arrangement of arms on the ship was strategic, ensuring easy access during both offensive raids and defensive maneuvers. Maps and knowledge of the seas were indispensable. Though the Vikings relied heavily on oral tradition, landmarks, and celestial navigation, scribes and elders maintained mental or physical charts that recorded currents, tides, and hazards. These maps included details about river mouths, rocky shoals, and safe harbors. Young navigators were trained to memorize these routes, observe stars, and recognize bird patterns and cloud formations as guides. Preparation was as much about education and observation as it was about stocking food and supplies. Before departure, rituals were performed. Boats were blessed, not in the sense of worshipping a deity, but as an acknowledgement of the power of the sea and the uncertainties that lay ahead. Offerings were sometimes made, knots tied in specific patterns, and the ship's prow was inspected for symbolic carvings, ensuring that morale and focus were reinforced. These acts connected the community, instilling a sense of shared purpose and respect for the natural world. Crew assignments were carefully considered. Experienced rowers were paired with apprentices, while warriors and scouts were assigned based on skill, endurance, and temperament. Tasks were divided, and schedules established for rowing, watchkeeping, maintenance, and navigation. Each member of the crew had a role, and understanding one's responsibilities was essential for both survival and efficiency. Timing was also critical. The Vikings knew that the North Atlantic was unforgiving, and that storms could strike suddenly. Voyages were planned to coincide with favorable winds and tides, and departures were often delayed or advanced based on weather observations. The preparation period thus became a delicate balance between readiness and opportunity, between patience and ambition. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The crew gathered, provisions loaded, weapons ready, and the ship positioned carefully in the water. Young sailors felt the excitement and trepidation alike, aware that they were about to leave familiar lands for uncharted waters. The lessons learned during weeks of preparation, the careful packing of food, the inspection of tools, the study of maps, and the performance of rituals would now be tested in practice. The preparation of a Viking voyage was therefore not merely a logistical exercise but a comprehensive education in survival, teamwork, and respect for the environment. Every barrel of provisions, every polished weapon, and every carved knot represented generations of accumulated knowledge as the dragon ship floated, balanced and ready It embodied the culmination of months of meticulous work, the hopes of a community, and the promise of adventure beyond the horizon. The day had finally arrived. After months of preparation, the dragon ship lay ready at the fjord's edge, its polished hull glistening in the pale northern sun. The crew, a mix of experienced sailors, warriors, and apprentices, moved with quiet precision, carrying provisions, ranging oars, and checking sails. The air was sharp and salty, tinged with both the promise of adventure and the anxiety of the unknown. As the oars touched the water, a rhythm began steady, synchronized strokes that pushed the vessel forward. The young apprentices felt the vibrations of the ship beneath their feet, the pull of the water against the oars, and the subtle sway of the hull as it responded to each movement. The dragon ship was alive. Every plank, every rope, every sail worked together to translate human effort into motion across the fjord. The wind played a crucial role. Viking sailors, though accustomed to the unpredictable northern weather, carefully observed its direction and strength. A sudden gust could tip an inexperienced rower or shift the balance of the vessel. The sails, square and broad, were adjusted continuously, their angles tweaked to capture maximum power without destabilizing the ship. Seasoned sailors communicated with hand signals and short shouts, coordinating actions across dozens of rowers. Every adjustment required attention, experience, and trust in both the ship and one another. The fjords provided a sheltered corridor at first, allowing the crew to synchronize and build confidence. Hidden coves and narrow channels tested their steering skills, ensuring that every helmsman understood the subtleties of navigation. Rocks lurked beneath the surface, sometimes visible only as ripples, and the currents could pull a ship off course in seconds. Observation, caution, and constant communication were essential. Even the smallest mistake could mean a collision with a reef or a grounding in shallow water. Beyond the fjords, the open sea awaited. The horizon stretched endlessly, with waves rising and falling like a restless heartbeat. The first taste of the Atlantic's expanse brought both awe and fear. Here, the knowledge gained in sheltered waters was put to the test. The ship responded differently to the wind's power, to swells that rose without warning, and to the rhythm of tides that could accelerate or retard progress. The crew had to remain vigilant, constantly adjusting sails, oars, and course to maintain stability. Celestial navigation became increasingly important. The Vikings observed the sun's position, the patterns of clouds, and the flight of birds to maintain direction. By day, landmarks were used when visible. By night, stars guided the helmsman. Apprentices learned to combine observation with memory, connecting signs from the environment to known routes. These skills were vital, for a miscalculation could lead the ship into dangerous waters or far from intended destinations. Food and water were carefully rationed from the start. The barrels of salted meat and dried fish were distributed evenly to maintain balance, and daily allowances were monitored to ensure sustenance lasted for weeks. Hygiene was also a concern. Seasickness, exposure, and cramped conditions could compromise health and efficiency. The captain and senior sailors reminded the crew of the importance of conserving energy, avoiding unnecessary risk, and observing the behaviors of the environment for clues about weather or hazards. Storms, though feared, were anticipated. Viking sailors understood that preparation and experience could turn potential disaster into a demonstration of skill. They adjusted sails, shifted ballast, and coordinated rowing to counter high waves and strong winds. The crew's training in fjords, along rivers, and in winter conditions proved invaluable. The ship flexed and absorbed the stress of the ocean, while the crew adapted continuously, their confidence growing with each successful maneuver. As the dragon ship sailed further, the sense of unity among the crew deepened. Every action was interdependent, Rowers relied on the helmsman relied on the scouts, and the scouts relied on observation and judgment. Trust was as crucial as skill. This shared responsibility, coupled with the rhythm of oars, the hiss of water, and the creak of wood, created a meditative pattern. For the young apprentices, the experience was both exhilarating and instructive. It taught resilience, patience, and the necessity of cooperation in the face of an unpredictable natural world. The voyage's beginning was a blend of caution and curiosity, fear and excitement, skill and instinct. The dragon ship moved steadily toward open water, every plank and sail a testament to human ingenuity and generations of accumulated knowledge, with each wave that passed beneath. The young Vikings internalized the lessons of their elders, the importance of preparation, the power of the natural world, and the enduring rewards of courage tempered by wisdom. The dragon ship left the sheltered fjords behind, entering waters that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The crew felt a mixture of awe and trepidation. The fjords had been protective corridors, but here, in the open sea, the elements were entirely at the mercy of wind and current. Waves rose in rolling swells, each one larger than the last, creating a rhythm both terrifying and mesmerizing. The ship's timbers groaned under the stress, yet they held together, a testament to the craftsmanship of months-long preparation. Navigating these vast waters required careful observation. The Vikings relied on multiple natural signs: the position of the sun by day, the stars by night, the flight of seabirds, and the color and movement of the water. Experienced helmsmen noted subtle shifts in current, changes in wind direction, and variations in wave patterns that could indicate distant storms. Apprentices watched closely, learning to interpret these signs, knowing that even a single misread cue could send the ship hundreds of miles off course. Daily life aboard the ship was governed by rhythm and routine. Rowers took turns, their muscles straining against the relentless push of water, while others rested, ate, or maintained equipment. The monotony of rowing was broken only by the occasional call of a lookout or the creaking of the hull as it responded to shifting currents. Maintaining morale was essential. Stories of past voyages, songs of distant lands, and tales of legendary warriors were recited to sustain focus and fortitude. The young sailors internalized not only practical skills but also the cultural memory of their people, carried forward on the waves. Storms were both feared and respected. The open sea offered no refuge, only skill, preparation, and teamwork could protect the crew. When clouds darkened the sky and wind began to howl, sails were adjusted, ballast shifted, and rowers coordinated to maintain course and balance. The ship heaved and tilted, taking on water occasionally, which was promptly bailed out. Each wave demanded precision and courage, testing the crew's training and their trust in one another. The young apprentices learned quickly that fear could be managed with experience and cooperation, and that the sea, though unpredictable, could be understood through careful observation. Food and water required meticulous management. Salted fish, dried meat, grains, and hard bread were rationed carefully. The distribution of supplies considered the ship's balance. Barrels were placed strategically, not just for accessibility, but to maintain stability. Freshwater casks were guarded zealously, for scarcity could lead to conflict or illness. Every meal was a lesson in resource management, teaching discipline and foresight, skills that would be crucial for survival on longer voyages. The crew also engaged in constant maintenance. Lines were checked and tightened, the hull examined for leaks, and sails repaired as necessary. Even small mistakes could be magnified over hundreds of miles of open water. The Viking ship was a living system. It required constant attention, patience, and coordination. The elders among the crew emphasized that respect for the vessel and the sea was inseparable, and error in either could be catastrophic. As the days passed, the horizon began to change. Land became a faint memory. The vast expanse of the North Atlantic stretched endlessly. The rhythmic motion of rowing, the call of seabirds, the sound of waves against the hull, and the creaking of wood formed a meditative pattern. The apprentices and young sailors internalized the lessons of patience, endurance, and observation, understanding that survival depended not only on strength but on attentiveness, collaboration, and adaptation. The open sea was also a place of wonder. Dolphins sometimes appeared alongside the ship, riding the bow waves, and gulls hovered overhead, their calls echoing across the water. The crew observed the behavior of these creatures carefully, interpreting patterns that could hint at nearby land or changes in weather. Even seemingly small signs carried meaning. A distant glint on the horizon or the direction of floating seaweed could alter decisions and courses. The Vikings' knowledge of natural signs was not superstition, it was practical wisdom honed over generations. Nights on the open sea were both serene and challenging. The stars became the primary guide. With constellations memorized and interpreted with precision, cold and dampness tested the resilience of the crew. But careful organization and rotation of duties ensured that all could rest and recover. The soundscape at night, the waves, the wind, the occasional cry of a bird created an environment both calming and alerting. Sailors developed a sensitivity to shifts in air, water, and wave, learning to anticipate the next movement or change in weather. Weeks turned into months. Every day brought lessons: the unpredictability of the sea, the importance of teamwork, the necessity of precise observation, and the subtle interplay between wind, current, and human effort. The dragon ship became more than a vessel, it became a teacher, guiding the crew in practical skills, discipline, and endurance. Each member of the crew, from the youngest apprentice to the most seasoned helmsman, internalized the collective knowledge of generations, allowing the Viking people to traverse vast distances with confidence and resilience. By the time the first distant coastline appeared, a mixture of excitement, relief, and anticipation swept through the crew. They had survived the vast, unpredictable expanse of the North Atlantic. Navigating by knowledge, skill, and cooperation, the open sea had tested them in every conceivable way, teaching lessons that would endure for the rest of their lives. The dragon ship, a product of meticulous craftsmanship, preparation, and experience, had proven its worth, and as it approached foreign shores, it carried not only provisions and warriors but centuries of accumulated wisdom, courage, and the enduring spirit of the Viking people. After weeks of navigating the open seas, the first signs of land appeared on the horizon. For the crew, this was a moment of both relief and heightened alertness. The North Atlantic had tested them endlessly, but now the unknown of distant shores awaited, bringing new opportunities and new dangers. The dragon ship, resilient and balanced, cut through the last swells as the coastline grew clearer, cliffs rising from the sea like silent sentinels. The Vikings were meticulous in their approach. Scouts, positioned at the prow and along the sides of the ship, scanned the shoreline for natural harbors, river mouths, and potential threats. The behavior of birds, the color of vegetation, and the patterns of tidal movement provided clues. Even small changes in the water's surface could indicate hidden rocks or sandbars that might endanger the ship. Every observation mattered, and every crew member knew that a single oversight could have catastrophic consequences. Upon reaching the shore, the crew prepared for landing. The dragon ship was carefully guided into shallow water, the keel lifted slightly to avoid grounding. Warriors readied themselves quietly, checking weapons and shields while ensuring that provisions and essential supplies were secure. Landing was a delicate operation, requiring coordination and precision. The success of the initial disembarkation often determined the outcome of the entire expedition. Exploration began with small reconnaissance parties. Experienced warriors and scouts moved inland first, observing terrain, identifying possible settlement locations. and noting sources of fresh water. They recorded information mentally, as maps were rare, relying on memory, natural markers, and discussions with those who had journeyed before. Every hill, river, and grove held significance. Knowledge of the land meant safety and potential advantage. Interactions with local populations required both caution and strategy. Viking expeditions were not solely predatory. Trade, alliances, and knowledge exchange were equally important. Initial encounters were carefully orchestrated, signals were exchanged, intentions measured, and behaviors observed. The Vikings understood that diplomacy and intimidation were both tools in establishing a foothold. Those who acted recklessly often faced resistance or ambush. Raids, when undertaken, were executed with careful planning. Warriors moved swiftly and silently, striking where defenses were weakest. Shields were interlocked, axes swung with practiced precision, and formations maintained discipline even in the chaos of sudden conflict. At the same time, elders observed, ensuring that the operation adhered to principles of minimal risk and maximum efficiency. Knowledge accumulated over generations informed every tactical decision. Beyond immediate conflict, exploration involved gathering resources and information. Timber, furs, grain, and other materials were collected, inspected, and stored. Observations about the land's fertility, climate, and potential for future settlement were recorded. Scouts learned to read seasonal patterns, identifying the best times for planting or harvesting, understanding the habits of local wildlife, and anticipating environmental challenges. Every day spent on shore reinforced lessons about adaptability, observation, and strategic thinking. Young apprentices learned not only how to fight but how to live in unfamiliar environments. They noted the direction of rivers, the flow of winds, and the locations of natural shelters. Every tree, rock, and bend in the river held potential insight, guiding decisions about camp placement, defensive positions, and routes of retreat. As weeks turned into months, the crew became intimately familiar with their new surroundings. The process of raiding and exploration was cyclical: landings, reconnaissance, engagement, resource gathering, and return to the ship. Each cycle refined the skills of the crew, deepened their understanding of the landscape, and strengthened their cohesion as a unit. Even the most experienced sailors and warriors learned from the environment, gaining knowledge that would prove invaluable for future expeditions. The psychology of raiding was equally crucial. Confidence, restraint, and discipline were cultivated as carefully as physical skills. Overconfidence could lead to unnecessary danger, while excessive caution could result in missed opportunities. Leaders balanced these forces, guiding young warriors in the art of timing, observation, and decisive action. Moral and social codes were intertwined with strategy, creating a system in which every member of the crew understood their responsibilities and the consequences of their actions. Finally, after months of meticulous effort, the Vikings prepared to depart once more. The dragon ship, laden with knowledge, resources, and the collective experience of the crew, was guided back into the open sea. Waves, wind, and horizon became familiar companions. Each element observed and respected. The lessons learned on land about terrain, people, resources, and strategy were carried forward, adding depth to the crew's growing expertise. The process of raiding and exploration was therefore not merely a series of military or economic actions, it was an extensive educational endeavor. Every encounter, every observation, and every decision contributed to the enduring knowledge of the Viking people. As the ship sailed away from the coastline, it carried not only treasures and provisions, but also lessons in strategy, survival, and human cooperation, lessons that would echo through generations. As the first snow began to fall across the northern lands, the Viking crews knew their journey could not continue as planned. The seas were turning restless, waves grew colder, winds harsher, and daylight shorter. Even the most experienced helmsman understood that the winter months were not meant for long voyages. It was time to seek a place to winter, a temporary home where the crew could repair their ships, rest, and prepare for the spring return. They chose their site carefully. A sheltered bay, protected from the fiercest storms, was ideal. High cliffs would block the northern winds, and access to fresh water from nearby streams was essential. Once a suitable inlet was found, the crew moved with practiced coordination. The Dragon ship, once their living vessel, became a floating storehouse. Supplies were unloaded, tents and wooden shelters were built along the shore, and fires were lit to warm the frigid air. Life in a winter camp demanded different skills than those used at sea. The rowers, once defined by strength and rhythm, became builders and craftsmen. Timber from nearby forests was cut and shaped into beams for huts, repairs for the ship, and furniture for daily living. The blacksmith, whose forge had traveled with them in pieces, reassembled his tools and began mending broken weapons, nails, and fittings. The steady ring of his hammer became the heartbeat of the camp. Each morning, small groups ventured inland to hunt or gather resources. Game was scarce but not impossible to find: deer, boar, and sometimes wild birds. Others fished in nearby rivers, cutting holes through the ice, lowering nets with patience. The catch, when plentiful, was salted or smoked to last the long cold months. Women who sometimes traveled with the crew tended fires, prepared food, and wove clothing from wool and furs, ensuring everyone was protected from the biting cold. Evenings were slow and reflective. The men gathered around fires, sharing stories of past voyages, battles, and gods they believed watched over them. The flicker of flame cast dancing shadows on their weathered faces, revealing lines carved by salt, wind, and time. The storytellers' voices carried softly through the still air, blending with the crackle of burning wood and the distant call of an owl. Some nights, when the sky cleared, they would step outside to gaze at the stars. The constellations they once used to navigate the seas now offered silent comfort. The shimmering aurora painted the heavens with waves of green and purple light, and though they did not fully understand its nature, they felt its power. It reminded them that the same forces guiding the sea also ruled the sky and the land beneath their feet. Over the weeks, the camp evolved into a small, functioning community. There were routines, roles, and rhythms. Guards were posted to watch for threats: wild animals, or occasionally, local tribes. But often, these encounters led to trade rather than conflict. Furs, iron tools, and jewelry were exchanged for grain, honey, or pottery. The Vikings, though fierce in reputation, understood that cooperation was sometimes more rewarding than conquest. Winter also became a time for teaching. Young crew members were trained in woodcraft, navigation, and the handling of weapons. The elders told them not just how to fight, but how to endure, how to maintain discipline, patience, and awareness when isolation set in. Stories carried moral weight: loyalty, courage, and respect for nature were praised above raw strength. As the weeks stretched into months, a strange peace settled over the camp. The furious energy of raids gave way to a quiet determination to survive. Friendships deepened, songs were born, and the rhythm of daily life became steady and predictable. Some even found comfort in the simplicity of the cold routine: chop wood, mend gear, share food, tell stories, and sleep beneath the frozen stars. When spring's first thaw arrived, it was both a relief and a farewell. The ice began to crack, rivers to flow, and the air carried the scent of wet earth. The Dragon ship was repaired, reloaded, and refitted for the open sea. Sails were patched, ropes tightened, and the prow's carved dragon head was polished until it gleamed in the pale sunlight. Before departure, the crew held one final feast. Fires blazed bright, meat flowed freely, and laughter echoed against the cliffs. They gave thanks to each other, to their ancestors, and to the unseen powers that had kept them safe through the dark winter. Then, as dawn painted the horizon gold, they pushed the ship back into the water. The oars dipped in unison, and the dragon ship once again came alive, its crew hardened, wiser, and ready to face whatever the sea might bring. The bay that had been their refuge slowly disappeared behind them, but its memory stayed of cold nights and warm fires, of hardship and camaraderie. It had been a season of endurance, learning, and quiet strength for every Viking aboard. That winter was not wasted time but a chapter of growth, proof that even in stillness, the spirit of exploration endured. When spring finally returned to the north, it did not arrive gently. It came with a rush of melting rivers, cracking ice, and the scent of thawed soil rising from the earth. The Viking camp, once quiet under snow, awoke with new energy. Fires burned bright again, not for warmth but for forging tools, repairing sails, and preparing for journeys yet to come. But this time, their purpose was not only conquest. Years of raiding and exploration had taught many Viking leaders that the world beyond their fjords was vast, and not every shore had to be taken by force. Trade, when approached with strength and cunning, could bring as much glory and often more wealth than battle. Their ships once again kissed the sea, gliding across the dark waters under wide, striped sails. As the oarsmen rowed, they followed familiar routes across the North Sea, toward the coasts of the Franks, the Saxons, and beyond. The same harbors that had once seen fire and blood now saw negotiation, exchange, and cautious friendship. The first trading settlements had begun as little more than seasonal outposts, small wooden docks built near rivers or sheltered bays. But over time, these grew into thriving centers of commerce. One of the earliest and most famous was Hedeby, located near the base of the Jutland Peninsula. Traders from the north, south, and east gathered there, Norsemen, Danes, Franks, Slavs, and even distant Arabs. The air was filled with the mingled scents of tar, fish, spices, and smoke. Goods from faraway lands changed hands daily. The Vikings brought furs, walrus ivory, and amber treasures of the frozen north. In return, they received silver coins, silk, fine glass, wine, and sometimes slaves captured from earlier raids. These exchanges not only filled their chests with riches but also connected them to a network that spanned from the British Isles to Byzantium, from the Baltic forests to the deserts of Arabia. In the great markets of Hedeby, one could hear a dozen languages at once. Men with dark hair and sharp eyes from the east bargained beside tall, fair-haired warriors from the north. Words were often replaced with gestures, hands showing weight, fingers tracing shapes in the air, smiles and nods sealing deals faster than speech. It was in places like these that the Vikings learned diplomacy. A chieftain who could read another man's tone, sense insult or sincerity, and respond with calm confidence was worth more than 10 warriors. Feasts were held to seal alliances, with mead and roasted meat served to all. Drinking horns were raised in toasts that promised peace, though every man kept a hand near his blade, just in case. Some Vikings went even further than trade. They sought to settle along rivers and coasts. Norsemen built long houses beside the locals, intermarried, and adopted new customs. They became part of the lands they once raided, and what would later become Normandy. For example, Norse settlers under Rollo forged a new kind of kingdom not by conquest alone, but through negotiation with the Frankish kings. Further east, others sailed down the great rivers of Russia, the Dnieper and Volga, forming trade routes that reached as far as Constantinople, the shining heart of the Byzantine Empire. These seafarers, known as the Rus, became both merchants and mercenaries, offering their strength to emperors and their goods to distant markets. They brought back not only silver and silk, but also stories of grand palaces, gold mosaics, and a religion unlike any they had known before. The more they traveled, the more their world expanded. They began to see themselves not only as raiders or explorers, but as part of a larger web of civilizations. Their longships were not merely vessels of war, they were bridges between cultures. At night, in their coastal camps, the merchants and warriors gathered around fires as before, yet their stories had changed. Now they spoke of foreign courts, of strange foods and distant gods, of markets where gold flowed like rivers. The old songs of battle still echoed, but new verses told of voyages where peace, not blood, brought triumph. In some places, they became protectors of trade routes. Viking fleets patrolled the seas, not to plunder, but to keep pirates and rival tribes at bay. A strange irony took root. Those once feared as marauders now enforced safety on the very waters they had once terrorized. Still, the Viking spirit was never fully tamed. Even the most successful traders kept their axes close, and every feast could turn to a brawl with one careless word. But gradually, through contact and commerce, the rough edges of their culture softened. Silver coins became more common in Norse lands. Foreign words entered their language. Mark, pund, scat, the roots of trade and currency. Fine fabrics began to replace rough wool. Glass beads and bronze bracelets adorned the necks and wrists of their women. Even the sagas began to change, telling not just of heroes and gods, but of journeys and bargains, of clever traders who outwitted kings. One could say that trade transformed them more deeply than conquest ever did. The sea remained their pathway, but now it led not only to battlefields, but to marketplaces, courts, and cities. Through trade, they built a bridge between the wild north and the civilized south, between pagan forests and Christian cathedrals. When a Viking ship returned home after months of travel, the village would gather at the shore. Children ran ahead, shouting as the dragon-head prow appeared on the horizon. Chests were unloaded, revealing gleaming silver, bright cloth, and exotic spices. Tales were told late into the night of the wonders they had seen: deserts of endless sand, towers of marble, cities larger than any in the north. And somewhere in those stories lay the quiet truth of the Viking legacy, that they were not only destroyers, but builders, not only warriors, but travelers, merchants, and dreamers. The fires of war might fade, but the routes they opened, the towns they founded, and the words they exchanged would live on for centuries. Even when their time as raiders ended, the marks they left upon the world on language, trade, and culture would never disappear. Their ships had carried them far, but their greatest voyage had not been across the sea. It had been a journey from chaos to connection, from isolation to understanding. The Viking Age was as much an era of transformation as it was of conquest, and through trade, they became more than just men of the north. They became citizens of the world. As the final embers of the long northern summer fade, and the first whispers of autumn roll across the fjords, the Viking world settles into quiet reflection. The restless oars that once split the waves from Greenland to Byzantium now hang silently above calm waters. The grand longships, carved dragons of oak and pine, lie anchored in mist-shrouded harbors, their sails folded like the wings of resting eagles. For centuries, these people of the north had known only motion, the rhythm of the sea, the pull of the horizon, and the call of adventure. Yet, in the stillness of twilight, even the fiercest warriors must rest. Now, the old men who once raided foreign shores sit by flickering hearths, telling tales to wide-eyed grandchildren who listen in wonder to stories that seem almost like myths. The legacy of the Vikings is not written only in the chronicles of kings or the ruins of distant monasteries they once plundered. It lives in the waterways they mapped, the trade routes they forged, and the stories they left behind, stories of courage, loss, discovery, and longing. In truth, the Vikings were more than raiders. They were explorers, artisans, poets, and dreamers who sought meaning in the wide, unknown world. Their ships, elegant, symmetrical, and swift, became symbols of human daring. Crafted with precision, each plank fitted by hand, every seam sealed with tar and wool, they carried not just men and weapons, but hopes and memories. On those decks, songs of home mingled with the cries of gulls, laughter mixed with the creak of ropes, faith and fear traveled together beneath the same northern sky. Even now, 1,000 years later, when the wind rises over the North Sea and the waves shimmer under the pale moon, it is said that one can still hear echoes of those old voyages. The splash of oars, the faint hum of a war song carried by the mist. Perhaps it is only the imagination of dreamers, or perhaps the sea remembers. The Viking spirit endures not in conquest, but in curiosity. It lives in every explorer who gazes at a map and wonders what lies beyond the edge. It lives in every craftsman who shapes something lasting with his hands. It lives in every storyteller who breathes life into forgotten legends. And so, the saga of the North never truly ends. It lingers in the quiet places where sea meets sky, where mist clings to cliffs, and where fires still burn in the hearts of those who seek to know the world. The Vikings may have vanished from the fjords, but the tides still whisper their names: Varric, Leif, Freydis, and countless others whose courage defied the cold and the unknown. As the final light fades and the long night returns, the listener can almost feel the weight of a wool cloak, the chill of sea spray, and the pulse of a heartbeat that once matched the rhythm of the oars. The wind hums softly, and the waves lap gently against invisible shores. The story of the Vikings, of their ships, their dreams, and their endless journeys continues not in battlefields or sagas carved on stone, but in the quiet hum of the world itself. For every wind that blows across the northern seas carries a fragment of their tale, whispering to those who listen in the dark, the sea is eternal, and so are those who dared to sail it. Now, as the final stories of the Vikings settle like soft mist over the fjords, the world itself seems to breathe with quiet calm. The longships rest gently in the harbors, their hulls rocking lightly with the rhythm of the waves, sails folded like sleeping birds. The sun has dipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind trails of amber, violet, and soft silver in the sky. The northern lights shimmer faintly, like delicate ribbons of color moving slowly across the heavens. Imagine the sea stretching endlessly before you. Its surface is smooth and glimmering, reflecting the fading colors of twilight. A gentle breeze brushes your skin, carrying the faint scent of salt and pine, as if the entire fjord is exhaling a lullaby meant just for you. Listen closely: the soft lap of water against the rocks, the distant cry of a seabird, the whisper of wind through the masts of anchored ships, all join together to create a calm, timeless rhythm. The Vikings, who once rode these waters with strength and courage, now rest in the echoes of their own stories. You can picture their longships drifting silently across the gentle waves, carrying memories of adventure, discovery, laughter, and quiet contemplation. Every plank and rope, every carved dragon on the prow, holds the history of journeys past. And though the sailors themselves are gone, their spirit lingers, mingling with the sound of the sea, the rustle of sails, and the glow of stars overhead. Allow your thoughts to float along with them. Imagine drifting in a small boat, rocked softly by the tide, seeing the vast northern sky stretching endlessly above you. The stars twinkle faintly, mirrored by the silver shimmer of the water. The northern lights dance gently, their movements slow and graceful, painting the night with soft green and violet light. Each breath you take is in time with the rise and fall of the waves. Each heartbeat echoes the rhythm of oars long since stilled. You feel the cool spray of the sea on your face, the faint warmth of a wool cloak around your shoulders. The world is quiet, yet alive. The water glows softly under the moon, and the wind hums a gentle melody as it flows past. You are part of this vast, eternal ocean, floating alongside the longships, moving with the stories of those who dared to sail beyond the known. Every sound is slow, deliberate, and soothing. The water kisses the hulls, the wind caresses the sails, the distant mountains fade into shadow. Your body relaxes as your mind drifts, carried along by the pulse of the waves. Imagine the lull of motion, the gentle rocking that mirrors the comfort of a cradle, carrying you deeper into calm and rest. And now, as you sink further into this peaceful world, the stories of the Vikings, their courage, their laughter, and their love of the sea, settle in your imagination. They become part of the quiet rhythm that surrounds you, the ebb and flow of the tide, the whisper of wind, the shimmer of stars on water. And you feel yourself drifting, floating on this endless ocean, the sea carrying your thoughts, your dreams, and your rest. The night grows deeper. The fjords are silent. The longships glimmer faintly in the moonlight, and the northern lights slowly fade into soft shadows. The gentle wave of the water and the faint hum of wind are all that remain, guiding you into sleep. And as your eyes close, know that the sea is eternal, the stories are eternal, and you are now part of this quiet, endless journey.